I got to ask you, for a guy that's been involved in blockchain to the extent that you have, as well as for the length that you have, when is blockchain going to have its chat GPT moment? When will blockchain become ubiquitous? When will it reach the masses?
It's a great question. I'm glad you started there. That's definitely something that I've been sort of predicting for quite some time. When I got into blockchain in 2015, which is really where I went down the rabbit hole, I spent about 6 months really thinking about how has technology evolved in the web stacks. How should we think about this technology as it relates to that? And if you ever listen to Tim Berners-Lee, who's one of the essentially a lot of people regard him as the father of the internet tech stack, the comments that he makes about the internet that he really feels like where sort of it fell down was actually an identity. So that sort of pushes you towards, well, what form of identity? What does identity mean in a decentralized substrate like the internet? How do we think about those technologies in a way that allows a consumer to be self-representative and control over their personal data, and actually have a system that, if you're going to represent a human being that is self-sovereign, that's actually incorruptible by regime change and things like that. And so from a tech stack perspective, this has now been well studied since blockchain came onto the scene. Blockchain has taught us that there's a way to have a technical substrate which gives you self-sovereignty. And so that's pretty interesting, right? And it actually goes in a hole that Tim Berners-Lee recognized and has recognized for quite some time. So that's a foundational technology. Blockchain also teaches us that you can transact value on the internet in a way that is very hard today, where you're transferring digital assets essentially of various forms that have a lot of attributes associated with that, and one of those attributes can be value. And then thirdly, this idea that you can have an identity and own your own data sort of closes the loop on this concept of digital assets and ownership. And so you now have this tech stack, which almost a decade in, right, it has evolved and matured. And I was having this conversation with someone yesterday. It's like, well, where are we on the journey if you compare this to the internet and e-commerce and the scaled up applications that we see, particularly in the e-commerce space? And only a couple of years ago, I would have said that in the blockchain space, we were like in the sort of the pre-internet stage, right? Like before consumers became aware of the internet, which largely was around 1995, right? Microsoft had actually an interesting opportunity to have something to do with that moment by introducing as the default in technology stack for networking into Windows 95, basically replaced a proprietary networking stack with TCP/IP, which is the stack of the internet, as a default. So now when consumers, this is 1995, Microsoft shipped Windows 95. It was actually just the anniversary recently of that. You might have seen some videos of Microsoft executives dancing around on stage to the Rolling Stones song, Start Me Up, which, by the way, Microsoft licensed for that purpose. Like anybody who was buying a PC at that point that had Windows as an OEM software stack installed on it was getting actually proper access to the internet without any additional configuration, even though like the broadband telecom infrastructure wasn't quite there yet, right? And so that, to me, if you go back and you look at that, what does that represent? You have multiple browser companies at that point in time that enabled you to get access to the internet, including Netscape and Mozilla and Microsoft and others. That is the internet stack, and that's largely the internet stack that we have still today, right? It's, I mean, yes, HTML has evolved, right? But broadly, it's that tech stack. And then you have the 5 years of the building on top of that, right? Which then wound up in being the dot-com boom, essentially. And then obviously at the end of the 90s, the dot-com bust. And what happened in 2000? What happened in 2001 was people realized this technology was mature, right? And if you realize that this technology was mature, you can go build scaled up massive consumer businesses on top of that. So where we are today in blockchain is, I think we're at this point it feels like to me that like we sort of scale, we've solved identity, we've solved self-sovereignty, we've solved privacy essentially through various approaches, including zero-knowledge proofs. Zero-knowledge proofs are scaling very fast, and blockchains are scaling very fast, right? And so like you say, okay, well, scale, privacy, self-sovereignty, and then also wallet technology is maturing pretty dramatically to help protect consumers. And then you say, well, we have browsers like Opera browser, Brave browser. The Chromium browser doesn't quite have Web3 in it yet, but Microsoft Edge actually has a very early build of a crypto wallet browser inside of Edge. What this effectively means is that we've now got this new internet stack. To me, I propose that we are actually sitting at the time frame around 2000, 2001 when this new internet stack emerged and starts to become the default thing that's available, whether consumers care or not, right? Just like in 1995, consumers didn't care, but the stack was available. The next wave of mass consumer adoption or development and then adoption can happen, right? And so one of the things that I've been challenging myself and other people that I speak with is, what can you imagine can now be built on top of this new foundation? And that's where I think we are. I think we're at this stage where you could build massive consumer applications on top of this new tech stack, which is the evolved internet tech stack, which many people would call a Web3 enabled internet tech stack.